Hi, Art Heals All Wounds listeners. Before I get to the episode, I want to take a moment to address the June 24th, 2022 Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This decision stripped away the right to have a safe and legal abortion. Everyone should have the freedom to decide what's best for themselves and their families, including when it comes to ending a pregnancy. This decision has dire consequences for individual health and safety and could have harsh repercussions for other landmark decisions. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all Americans. Learn more by visiting choice.crd.co. That's choice.crd.co. If you're able to support others, please consider donating to abortion funds. I encourage you to speak up, take care, and spread the word. This episode is part of the Season 2 series on self. Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds, where we explore the intersection between art and well-being. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. If you could pick one thing in this world to be, what would you pick? Think about it for just a second. One thing that defines you, what would it be? This is a trick question, right? I mean, is anyone completely defined by only one thing? Isn't part of our life as a human to be curious and to explore and then to grow? But what if your one thing was helping people who needed hope and solutions for some of the most important aspects of their life? My next guest, Tahmina Watson, is an immigration lawyer in Seattle, Washington. That was Tahmina's one thing. Day in and day out, working with clients stressed to near breaking points. And so was she, absorbing their stress like a sponge. Then one day, working from home because of the pandemic, Tahmina caught a glimpse of another thing. This thing was a tiny brown sparrow in her backyard. She didn't know then that her moment of noticing this little bird would be the beginning of her path to finding joy as an artist. Tahmina Watson is a Seattle-based immigration lawyer. She's the founder of Watson Immigration Law, and she is the founder of Washington Immigrant Defense Network, an organization which funds and supports legal services for detained low-income immigrants. She's the co-founder of Airport Lawyers, which provided free legal services to vulnerable people affected by travel bans. She's also the author of 2 books, the most recent one titled Legal Heroes in the Trump Era. Her podcast, Tahmina Talks Immigration, is a platform where she can share her advocacy for immigration reform as well as interview other legal professionals doing important work in immigration law. And now she is benefiting from a fairly new role as an artist. Before we meet today's guest, I want to tell you about an app called Newsly. Newsly is an all-in-one audio super app for iOS and Android. There really hasn't been an app like Newsly before now. Newsly picks up all of the trending articles on the web and reads them to you in a natural human voice. You can find any topic you're interested in, sports, politics, or art. I've loved using this app. I listen to it when I'm commuting or when I'm gardening or while I'm cooking, anytime where I want to catch a little bit of news but my hands are full or I can't stop to read. You can also find trending podcasts from over 50 countries on Newsly, including Art Heals All Wounds. Newsly has become my go-to listening app for podcasts. If you want to try Newsly yourself, just download it from www.newsly.me. And if you use the promo code ARTHEALS, you'll get a free 1-month premium subscription. I'll include all of this info in the show notes so that you can just click on the link and use the ARTHEALS promo to get your free trial. Now, let's meet this week's guest. Tahmina, thank you so much for being on Art Heals All Wounds today. I always ask guests to start off by introducing themselves by telling us their name and what they do.
Well, Pam, I am so grateful that you're having me on your show. I'm so glad that we met recently, and it's just an honor to be here and to talk about something that is so close to my heart, but it's a new interest and new passion. And so I'm excited about this conversation. My name is Tahmina Watson, and my day job and everything else I do is all about immigration law. But there is a huge part of art and nature that has come into my life during COVID, which makes meeting you and this podcast so timely and important for me.
Well, I am so excited you're on the podcast too, and I'm so glad we met as well. We met at the She Podcast Live conference, and you sent me a message before the conference saying that you had this new art practice, and it was just great for me because immigration law is something that I've thought about a lot. I don't know a lot about it, but I have met other immigration lawyers, and I've always thought it must be an incredibly challenging law practice in this country, especially recently. So I'm really excited to hear both about what you do as an immigration lawyer, but then also how you've incorporated this art practice into your work.
Well, I'm so honored that you're giving me the opportunity to talk about immigration law too. As an immigration lawyer, I help people with the most important things in their lives, either their livelihoods or their loved ones. So when it comes to livelihoods, I'm working with a lot of businesses that are either starting companies and the founders need visas for themselves, or companies that have started but they need to bring talent and have skilled workers for their businesses. And the tech industry, of course, is something that we can all name and think about, but doctors and architects and teachers, any profession. When it comes to loved ones, I help people with their family members, so parents and children and spouses, so to speak. I also help people with their citizenship applications. I do not go to court, however, to fill the passion that I have for human rights. I did start a nonprofit in which we help train non-immigration lawyers in immigration law to fill the gap that's necessary for pro bono work. Some examples include things that you've heard in the news. When children are being separated from their parents, we needed a lot of lawyers to go to court. And so it's been a very fulfilling and rewarding part of the work I do, but that's my pro bono passion work. I also help in different things in the community, various committees, bar associations. I write a bi-weekly column for a new legal newspaper, an online newspaper called Above the Law. And then I also contribute to Entrepreneur Magazine, and I have 2 books. And I have a podcast.
I know. I listened to your podcast. I wanted to just get a sense of what your passions were and things like that. And it was fascinating to listen to. And that's also where I kind of got a clue that you perhaps faced a lot of frustrations in your work.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And I think any immigration lawyer that would be listening to this will be able to relate to everything I say, because over the last 4 years during the previous administration, we woke up one day and our lives were upside down, not just for our clients, but for us, because the law was changing drastically, or the policies rather, and the way you interact with the agency changed. And cases that were approved, exactly the same case that was approved one day, suddenly all of the rest, the next cases were being denied. We didn't do anything different. The goalpost basically shifted to the extent that we didn't know how to reach that goalpost. And every time we got there, it shifted again. And so there was a lot of chaos in, and of course, the news you mentioned, everything you saw in the news was affecting us directly in our workload. And so there came a point in which you can't help but bring home the work you do. And when you do that, you're also bringing on the frustrations and affecting your family. And I have two little children and an amazing husband. But I found that I was bringing that emotion home, where I was so struck by what the administration is doing to the community, people that I love, and my clients, and the country as a whole. And you can't help but not look down the road about what will happen next. How do I prepare? So, in the midst of all of that, I had to find a way to put the oxygen mask on my face. And that's where, today's story of how art came into my life was really a continuation of what I was doing at that time. So in the last 2, 3 years, I took on meditation, had a self-care practice. But when we found ourselves in this lockdown lifestyle, suddenly scrambling to figure out, how does one work from home? What kind of technology do you need? How do you work with the other people in your office that you're not seeing anymore in person? The shifts were insurmountable, it felt at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, you're also figuring out how to be a mother to two children who need you to be a teacher now, and you're a failed teacher in your life that you don't really realize until you're thrusted in it. And then whose Zoom is it anyway? Is it my Zoom conference? Is it my children's Zoom conference? Suddenly life was as chaotic as it could be. And so the meditation practice suddenly didn't seem enough if you could even fit it into a non-quiet spot in the house, because suddenly everybody's there. And so I had to start looking outwards. And it was really by chance that I started to pay attention to the birds that were in the backyard. And so that's how my art story begins, paying attention to nature outside.
Well, that's fascinating. So this was no further than your backyard, and it was birds.
Hmm.
What is the connection between birds and your art?
What's interesting is pre-COVID, I would go to work what felt like it was dark. I'd be the first parent to drop off my children and often the last parent to pick up the children. And I would be facing traffic to come back home. So when I'd come home, life was about get the dinner on the table, maybe do laundry, most of the time not. But before you know it, I'd need to go to bed. And then the cycle would begin again. My husband, on the other hand, actually already worked from home. So he was feeding birds with bird feeders during the weekends and what have you. And I never really noticed that he was doing that. I would just go to work and come home. But one day, as I was working, I heard the birds chirp and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And I went outside and I thought, oh, there's a bird. And I kept thinking, it's a sparrow. It wasn't, it was a bird that everybody has seen. But suddenly I started to pay attention to the color and the size and the shape of the wings. And when it's flying and fluttering its wings, how beautiful it would actually look. And I suddenly felt, wow, there's so much beauty here that I never really paid attention to before. And yes, maybe there's a crow. We all know what a crow looks like. But suddenly I was noticing the finches and the red-winged blackbird, or the jays, Stella, the bluebirds. And
Hmm.
suddenly I realized there's a whole world out here that I really never paid attention to. And they're all so beautiful. Each bird has its own vibrant color, whether even if it's black, it's a shiny black. If it's a robin, the red is so vibrant within. And so I started to pay attention and start taking photos with my cell phone. And I realized I wasn't getting the details of the birds enough. So I upgraded to using a DSLR camera that wasn't being used. So I
Mm-hmm.
started to use that. Not that I knew how to use it, I was just pointing and shooting. But I figured out how to take clearer pictures. And that was the beginning of my birding journey. I started to feel so much calmer with a 10-minute sort of, moseying around in the backyard, just watching the birds. I found myself so much calmer that when I was speaking to my clients who were just as anxious as I was calm, I realized that that anxiety was not necessarily rubbing off on me anymore.
Hmm.
In the past, I would be absorbing that anxiety, and then I'd be holding on to that anxiety. I think that's what we do as humans, and especially when you're empathetic to your clients and their situations. You can't help but take on that stress. But I found that with 10-minute breaks in between meetings, every few hours, I'd feel a sense of peace, and the beauty would carry me on for the rest of the day. And what was interesting is photography is an art, but I didn't really think of it as an art, you know?
Right.
And so I am now firmly a birder. And what's really interesting is I incorporated birding as part of my meditation practice. So the meditation practice continued to be there. I figured out how to get it in the end, and the only option was to wake up before the kids.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found is when you're out there looking at the birds, you can't help but be still and
Mm-hmm.
watch the birds in how they interact between themselves. One bird is jumping onto the feeder, another bird sort of makes that jump off because, there's only so much space. Sometimes they're fighting with the food, but you've got to be still so you're not noticed.
Right.
And so it was very interesting seeing this transition. And at the time, I didn't notice this transition was happening within me. I was just doing until, 8, 9 months had gone by, and I found that, oh my gosh, I'm missing the birds. And remember, in 2020, we didn't really see people in person much. We were all within our homes or seeing them through Zoom. And I don't know about you, I really didn't go out anywhere. I didn't, maybe to the grocery store. So in 2021, I started to see some friends who also had developed a love for birds. And we had
Ah,
met in parks, you know,
wow.
just taking bird pictures. But what was interesting is, and those who are birders and photographers who are your listeners will probably relate to this, that when you're looking at your photographs, they often feel like paintings.
Ah, yes.
The water, the colors of the leaves, the wingspans. And so I could envision paintings of a lot of the pictures I was taking.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, I wonder if I could paint. And I really didn't find the time to have art supplies. And I thought I needed a nice little spot that was just art. Those were some blocks I was getting in not being able to do them.
Right.
But one day I picked up a pen that I had, a Sharpie, and I said, let me just see if I can do the outline of a bird before I paint it. And that took a new life for me. And this was August 2021. I realized I had something. I
Yes.
remember going to a beach one day, and a crow was just crowing at me. It was just looking at me, and it was just cawing. And I thought, and I just kept taking pictures of it. It was almost like the bird was singing at me. And so that was my first picture. And I thought, this is not bad. It's not great. I wouldn't show anybody. But I thought, maybe try another picture. And I took I started sketching a heron that was in flight.
Mm.
It was so good. I shocked myself. I shocked myself at how it almost looked like a carbon copy, except I had used my freehand. And I
Wow.
realized at that moment, I think I have something. And
Mm.
I started to, do these sketches. And I realized that with paint, I was still getting this mental block. I need paint, I need a space, but I was actually pretty good with the sketches. So I just started
Mm.
to sketch, and I continued to sketch, and I took different birds, the heron, a hummingbird. I managed to get some hummingbird feeders in the house. So I took lots of hummingbird pictures, um, all the pictures that just felt beautiful. And so
Right.
now I fancy myself as the birding immigration lawyer who sketches.
I love that. Well, I want to go back to one thing that you said that was really interesting to me because you said that when you spoke with your clients now, you weren't absorbing their anxiety. And I imagine that maybe previous to this, you felt like you needed to become as worked up as they were in order to be helpful.
I think that's very true. And I think I did that. And I think at the time, because I didn't know any better, I was very worked up all the time. And that was my fuel. I channeled it. I learned to channel it in a positive way, find the
Mm-hmm.
solution for them, find a bigger solution this way or that way. But it was something that I couldn't get away from immigration because I was always worked up. If I'm sitting down with my kids, I'm still thinking about the solution I need to find or a case that has a problem. I just couldn't switch off. But
Mm-hmm.
I realized, and you might have seen this with all the work you've done, that if you don't switch off, you're draining yourself in what you need to do to be best
Mm,
at it.
mm.
And that became important when I realized that.
Right, right. And you're not the first person who's told me this, which is surprising because it's people from all walks of life. You feel like if you're not constantly absorbing the stress and feeling worked up, that it's a sign that you don't care. But by the same token, one thing that was said to me by another artist friend was like, well, with everything that's going on, this is just a signal to me that I really need to get to work doing my art. And I just thought, oh, that's really true. If she doesn't do her art, it doesn't mean she's going to solve anything. But the art that she does, it's helping her and potentially helping the world. And, sometimes that is the best thing you can do. And it goes beyond just the best thing you can do for yourself. I'm just wondering, did you find that you were possibly more effective for your clients when you were not so worked up?
Very much so. I think when you are not reactionary,
Mm,
you can be more proactive. You can be proactive and you can make sense of things better. When you are proactive and not reactionary, your steps are more thoughtful.
mm,
You're not scrambling. And often, particularly as these policies had changed over the last few years incessantly, we couldn't catch our breaths. So we were just trying to keep our heads above water. Thank goodness
mm,
we don't have to do that with this administration, but COVID has brought a different layer of problems. What
mhm,
happened with the last administration is they had created so many problems and created so many obstacles in the path of immigration law, and it was referred to as in the invisible wall.
mm,
They also practically destructed the USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, as an agency.
mm.
And so the infrastructure that you need to make things better is so broken that this administration is really focusing on trying to fix the infrastructure. But when
Right.
you're doing that while there's a global pandemic, there are huge humanitarian crises,
Mm,
the problems are just compounded. And within that, as a immigration lawyer in Seattle, I don't have the solutions to everything, but I can solve at least one client's problem by trying to go through the paths and the means that I need to take. But I cannot see clearly if I am stressed out all the time.
right.
And what I have found is, and I think you're right, every professional should have this. And to be honest, in the past, I never really understood why people said, do you have a hobby? What
Ah,
brings you joy? And I'm like, I don't have time for joy. I don't have time for a hobby. Who has time for that? And I think in the past, I might have thought that those who have hobbies are wasting time,
right.
but I think what is so important is if you can keep your joy, no matter what brings you joy. It could be hiking, it could be playing with your pet, it could be a musical instrument. There are just so many modalities of art that can, fuel your soul,
Right.
that if you are happy and joyful, there's no way you can't be a better person. And I think what is important in answer to your question or comment, following up on your comment, that if you are happy within yourself, that reflects onto the person that you are speaking. So instead of absorbing the anxiety, maybe you're reflecting some calmness back onto them.
Mm, that's really such a great way to put that. Yeah. So I'm just curious. You just now mentioned you're in Seattle. So you happen to be what I think of as like a birder's paradise. And I feel like the last time we talked, did you show me an image of a bald eagle that you had shot on your camera?
That's right. Yes. What's interesting is I'm not somebody who likes to exercise. I'm not somebody who goes out to parks just for walks. When my kids were small, I would just go out so they could run around a bit, but I'm not, lover of nature. But what happened was the love for birds has brought me out into nature. So now I'm
Mm,
beyond my backyard and I now go to different parks. I've joined some Facebook groups of birders who are ordinary people like you and me, but they are birders and they take amazing photos. Like every one of them
mm,
could be in wildlife magazine. So I get inspired by the skills and talents that they have, but they also note where they took the picture. And so now I will instantly go to Google Maps and find that place and save it as a birding spot. And I do live in a beautiful place. I don't think I've ever noticed how beautiful it is. And
mm.
I have now discovered a park that's only 5 minutes away from where I live. And there is a nest for eagles. It's an eagle nest. And I have now gone there so many times. Any spare time I have, I now go and take pictures. And my lens is now a 600 millimeter lens, which is a rather large and heavy lens. And
Right.
so what's interesting is this whole photography love and passion is making me want to be fitter. So I'm walking without realizing I'm walking for, hours sometimes. I'm also doing weight training so I can carry the camera.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's been very interesting to see all these transformations. But the long and the short of it is, I'm a much better human being for having
Mm.
art in my life.
Ah, that's so beautiful. Well, Tamina, I'm wondering where can people find out more about you, both your immigration work, your podcast, and also if you are posting any photos that you've shot, where can people find out? And as you're saying this, can you just quickly describe your podcast, the name of it?
Sure. Thank you so much again, Pam, for the opportunity to share all of this. My podcast is called Tahmina Talks Immigration. It's on iTunes and Spotify or wherever people get their podcasts. And in the podcast, I only talk about immigration, not birding. It's interesting. I'm sort of slowly letting people know I have a crazy side to me. My website is watsonimmigrationlaw.com. I
Hmm.
have a blog there, and I often will ask people to sign up if they're interested in immigration law because
Hmm.
we post about the updates and changes that happen all the time. If people want to connect, LinkedIn is a great place to connect. And it's my first name, last name is one word to find me. And then I do post pictures. I post them on Facebook a lot, but I post them on Instagram. That's where I
Yes.
generally post my pictures. And it's interesting. I do it for the love of photos and me, and I'm realizing that I'm actually pretty good at this and I need to share it more. So I'm
Yes.
figuring out how to, what do I need to do to have an art website? How do I sell a print and what are the things I need to know about that? I only know immigration law. I don't know anything
Right.
else. So I'm gathering some friends who have turned into artists full time, leaving
Mm,
a professional career. So I'm learning from them. And I'm just so excited. It brings me so much joy. The sketches that I do, now I'm learning about birds. I have all sorts of bird books and guides and folders. And then when I see a new bird, it just feels so exciting that I've seen a new species of birds, and then to sketch them, with
Mm,
my Sharpie. And so, yeah, it's really cool. And I think what is so great about you is you're showing people why art is important. And
mm,
people like me have not realized why art is important until
mm,
recently. You know, it feeds the soul. It definitely is an outlet
mhm.
to let go of whatever is bothering you in your
Right,
life, whether it's professional or personal. And
right.
what a way to bring joy to other people.
Yes, and I want to tell you how grateful I am to you for the work that you do. I know it's not easy, but I just think it's fantastic that you found a way for self-care because the work that you're doing is just so important, and immigration lawyers are needed more than ever, especially in the hopes that some of our immigration system is going to be repaired. So thank you
Thank
for the
you.
work that you do, Tahmina, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful and honored that you gave me the opportunity to talk about my art.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. We all need joy, don't we? I'm so grateful to Tahmina for being on the show today and sharing how her art practice helps her find her joy in order to do the incredibly important work she does as an immigration lawyer. If you want to find out more about Tahmina Watson, be sure to visit her website, watsonimmigrationlaw.com. Also, check out her podcast, Tahmina Talks Immigration. If you want to see her beautiful artwork, you can find it at tahmina-watson.pixels.com. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Golanian. The music you heard in the intro was by Ketsa. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. Thank you for listening to this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Remember to fill out the listener survey. You'll find that link right in the show notes.